But this is really a very exciting session. We had, this is the first time that we had a grant award that CloudResearch has funded, and we received something like almost 120 submissions, and they were all really good. Just a lot of really great submissions that we reviewed, and it was really very difficult to make these decisions in terms of like who gets the grants and who doesn't, because really so many of the submissions were excellent. At the end of the day, we did decide on 4 submissions that I think were really excellent and stood out for us, both in terms of just like the really excellent research questions, and in terms of just how much the research is not only interesting in itself, but also is able to benefit other research. I think a lot of the research projects have to do with databases or platforms or methodologies that are kind of novel and can really benefit research above and beyond that particular research study. So we found these studies to be really super exciting, and thank you all for participating and for submitting. And we would love to just in this session hear you all talk a little bit about your study. Unfortunately, the session is not that long. I think we have something like 25 minutes, so just a few minutes for everybody. But if we can just go around and let me just make sure that I can pronounce and know all your names. So Art Marsden and Michiel Spape. Is it Spape or Spape? Sorry, yeah, you're on mute.
It's actually Spape, but I was pretty. The Michiel was pretty close.
Michiel, so okay, okay, great. And Nick Bird and Megan Burns. So okay, fantastic. So let's just kick it off.
So yeah, it's really great news on my part that this kind of research is being funded. I had not expected it. It's very fundamental. Let me show what I have here. It's about time. So I'll give a little overview about the research and why I think it's worthwhile. Cat. So my research about time, fundamental dimension, but more specifically about the psychology of time perception. Now, time can go as it does, but sometimes it feels longer and shorter. However, we don't really have a sense for time perception, like an eye or something like that. So how do we do it? And there are basically 2 theories. The idea could either be that we take sensual information from the senses, and kind of make a story out of it. And through that, we know how much time has elapsed. Or otherwise, we might get kind of this information from the senses, like the sunrise, and so sun goes down again, so a day has passed, or a second has elapsed from your watch, or whatever. Or we also know that time is a function of emotions. So everybody's aware that time seems to go very fast when you're having fun, but vice versa, when some threatening kind of thing is about to happen, then sometimes time seems to go very slowly. So according to me, these are 2 kind of big theories in the field, but there's something that's missing there that combines, I think, both of them, which is movement. So if you think about emotions aren't just a feeling, but they also have an action aspect to them. So if you think about joy, for example, the elation comes with certain emotions, like jumping with joy. Or if you are being threatened, you might think about running away and getting as far as possible. So according to me, these kind of body movement aspects are inherent to time perception. You can also think about how the eyes are constantly moving, and about how everything, all our body is constantly moving about, and this may give you information about time. So to put it in a nutshell, what I think is happening is that the sense of time of a turtle is different from the sense of time of a hare, so faster and slower. So how to test this sort of thing? So what I proposed with the CloudResearch, for which I'm super grateful, is to do a little experiment online in which we test the effect of movements on time perception. So I asked people to imagine moving, to imagine either walking slower and slower, or to run faster and faster, or to just don't do anything but watch passively, and then to look at the screen that shows some stars passing. So you think about running, and you just time, how long does it take? You might say it takes about 10 seconds or something. And the hypothesis is that both the imaginary movements and the flow of the stars, so here you might have noticed that the stars were going slower and slower, affect our sense of time. So why would I be doing this other than that I'm super interested about the nature of time perception in general? So what's the value and where do our tax monies go for? Well, of course, it's really great that CloudResearch is now funding it, right? But in general, it's kind of a side project of Virtual Times, which is an EU project about virtual reality, so not in this study, and time perception in the idea or in the context of psychiatric disorders. So you might know that mental conditions can be pretty severe, but psychiatrists also know that they come with kind of temporal symptoms. So quite frequently people express things like, I feel stuck in time, time stands still. This is an aspect of depression. Or time seems to go super fast and I can't keep up and I must be faster, is an aspect of ADHD. People quite often say this, but it's usually seen as a kind of a symptom and not a cause. What if it is a cause? So it could be that these kind of time perception tasks measure something like temporal distortion. And if these time perception tasks can measure it, then they can diagnose it. Then furthermore, if we can change our sense of time perception, for example, by having people imagine movements, they might do something to fix time perception and therefore do something about the people, and maybe cause in the end a kind of a treatment for all sorts of important mental health issues. Thanks.
All right, excellent. Art.
So my name is Art, and I'm a PhD student at Syracuse University. And first, I did want to thank CloudResearch for this award. So myself and my team that are going to help me out with this and work on this, we're all really excited about this project. So we'll be seeking to validate an AI-generated database of social psychology face stimuli, and I'll give a very brief overview of what we'll be doing. So in social psychology research, researchers will often use photographs of human faces as stimuli in their experiments. So for example, a researcher might present participants with a photo of either a Black or a white person before an image of either a wallet or a gun to examine how race impacts misidentification of harmless objects as weapons. And for research like this, researchers will typically use validated stimulus face databases, such as the Chicago Face Database, which is where the images on this slide are from. That's a pretty popular one. And there are two main types of face stimuli databases that are available to researchers. So databases of artificial faces, which primarily include computer-generated faces. And then there are also databases of real faces that contain photographs of actual models. And so the main benefit of using an artificial database is you have more control over the features of your images, of your faces. So for example, you could modify a face's skin tone such that participants will receive largely the same face, but it might appear to differ in race or ethnicity. But then as a limitation, these faces often appear very artificial. So we might not be as sure how results from research using these faces might be applicable to real world situations. And then on the other hand, that's not really an issue when using databases of real faces, but researchers will then largely lose control over facial features. They can't really make these changes to facial features. So participants may be presented with a photo of, for example, a white woman or a completely different Black woman. And then the photographs of these two people, unfortunately, might differ on things other than race, such as subtle differences in facial expression or age or attractiveness, things like that. So what we want to do is create a large database of artificial faces that allows for greater control over facial features, but that also look real. So minimizing that primary limitation of many artificial databases. So specifically, we'll be using a generative adversarial network called StyleGAN2 that allows us to generate a very large number of these artificial yet very realistic looking faces. So to start, we plan to modify the faces we generate so that we have versions perceived as being different in race or ethnicity. And here's an example of the kinds of faces that we can generate with StyleGAN2. So we can keep the primary features of a face relatively stable, such that it appears to be largely the same person. But we can also subtly modify a face's skin tone, hair texture, and other facial features to change how that face will be perceived in terms of race or ethnicity. So then we can be more confident that any differences we observe were due to changes related to that face's perceived race and not some other unintended factor. And so we'll be using CloudResearch to validate our faces so we can best ensure that, for example, each face is perceived as a different race or ethnicity, and then also that making sure that each face is perceived as real. And we're also going to collect norming data for each face so that researchers can find the faces that would best work for them. And this database will be free to all researchers to use, so its greatest impact will be the findings from all researchers who do decide to utilize our database. And then eventually we'd like to expand our database to include other modifications. So for example, age, like in these images, or gender, or even facial expressions, things like that. So there are a lot of ways that we could take this to make our database even more useful to a wider range of research. And that's a very, very brief overview, but thanks again to CloudResearch for the award. We're really excited about it. And thanks again. Thanks to everyone else also for listening.
Okay, thank you, Art. And Nick is next.
Yeah, you guys are probably familiar with a lot of online research. We're studying people who are completing tasks or surveys or something like that on their own. They're often doing this in a very fast-paced manner, right? They're trying to maybe complete as many surveys as they can to maximize their income. Or you might think that, as it was described earlier, they see this as a paid leisure activity. So there's something that they're doing in a relaxing way. It's not the most effortful thing that they do throughout their day. And so the problem with this is that it makes it difficult to observe or even encourage reflective judgments in our studies. And so we're exploring a few solutions to this. One of them is incentivizing or facilitating better reason. But the second solution, which I'm going to focus on today, is getting people who disagree to discuss their reasons. And that just kind of the idea is that this would help people see other perspectives, consider reasons for other views, and therefore arrive at more reflective and considered judgments. And doing this online in real time is fairly difficult. So we've developed a platform where people can do this. So people come in, they give an initial judgment about some controversial issue or a philosophical thought experiment or a task from the decision science literature, like heuristics and biases tasks of the Kahneman and Tversky fame. And then those who disagree get matched together, assuming they came into the platform around the same time, and they get to discuss their disagreement, and then they get to give their judgment again after they've discussed. And there's some literature suggesting that groups will reason better than individuals, and so therefore we should expect the people who get assigned to these group discussion conditions to maybe come to better decisions or judgments than those who are in the conditions where they reason on their own. So I just alluded to a few different conditions, and here's just kind of a general flow chart of the way things work. Participants come in, they give this initial response on some stimuli. we'll be doing stimuli that are designed to polarize people. So we've pre-tested them to make sure that they kind of split most people in a 50-50 way, maybe a 60-40 way. And Philip Jivkovsky, who you're seeing at the bottom of the slide here, has done work developing this platform on a system called O-Tree, which is designed for kind of economic game experiments, and we're kind of reusing that for a different purpose. But people will either reason about things on their own or in a few different discussion conditions. And the differences between them are how the rewards are distributed. You're either rewarded as an individual or as a group that has to agree on a particular answer, or there's just no reward. And then after you go through one of these conditions, you reconsider your response. So we have a pre-post comparison we can make, and we also have a between conditions comparison we can make. And then obviously we can control for all sorts of factors, like, demographical things like that. I have a 60-second time lapse of the platform, but there's probably not time for that. So this is just showing you a split screen of what the platform looks like. There's a vignette that people are looking at, and then they have a chat bar on the right. And this is two of those chat bars side by side. And the basic idea is just to try to get a more ecologically valid, I'm going to skip the data, a more ecologically valid experience of reflective reasoning, right? So reflective reasoning, especially among academics, is a kind of thing we do socially. We are like what we're doing today in this conference. It's not the kind of thing that we do by pointing and clicking buttons on a short survey online. And so we're trying to get an online research platform that is scalable the way that MTurk and other platforms are, but also realistic in the way that our social reasoning tends to be. And so this platform will hopefully be able to deliver that. And we're very happy that we'll be able to plug it into the CloudResearch platform and have funding to run a few studies to make sure it works and see what we can find on various stimuli.
All right, thank you, Nick, and Megan.
So thank you guys for having me tonight. I'm really grateful to CloudResearch for providing funding for this project. We're honored to have been awarded a grant from you guys, and we're excited to share the project with you. So in the wake of ongoing and explicit anti-Black racism, venture capital, like many industries, has faced a reckoning through which leaders in the field have scrambled to address longstanding racial inequities. But the question remains, have these diversity initiatives actually been effective? Recent statistics demonstrate that the world of venture capital remains largely white and that minority founders continue to receive meager funds to launch their startups. So why do these inequities persist amidst calls for action and initiatives created for the sole purpose of bridging these achievement gaps? One explanation might be that racial bias is inadvertently shaping investors' decision-making practices. Regardless of whether or not investors are aware of this phenomenon, it might be the case that when deciding who to fund and how much to give, investors favor white-led startups over Black-led or minority-led startups. Maybe investors find themselves feeling more comfortable when someone who looks like them is pitching, or maybe racial stereotypes, which often pose Black men as lazy or unintelligent, are subtly tainting investors' decision-making processes. At the same time, many members of the venture capital industry believe that successful founders share important qualities. They must be visionaries and geniuses, gritty and determined. These traits appear to be incongruent with the pervasive negative stereotypes that Black men face. In addition to racial bias shaping venture capital decision-making, it might be the case that believing that successful entrepreneurs require special innate qualities may also prompt investors to favor white over Black founders. Of course, venture capital decision-making is complicated and there are many moving pieces. The practicality of the proposal, the amount of funding requested, how well the startup might fit into the investor's portfolio, all of these might contribute to an investor's decision to fund. So how can we determine whether the race of a startup's founder actually plays a role in how investors perceive the startup and its team? And how can we measure beliefs about what it takes to be an entrepreneur against this bias? We designed a project that simulates the decision-making processes of venture capitalists. So with the hopes of eventually collecting a sample of real VCs, our participants, which will be recruited through Prime panels, will consist of members of the venture capital field and individuals with an MBA or a business-related degree. Participants will be presented with a startup portfolio detailing the startup's ask, target audience, and other standard aspects of the pitch deck. Participants will then see one of two descriptions of the startup's team members, one with a racially diverse Black-led team and one with a majority white-led team. In every respect, both the teams and the startups are identically matched. The only variation is in the name of the startup's team members, which were pre-tested for racial typicality. So by isolating the racial composition of the startup's founder and team, we can explore how racial bias may impact not only decisions to fund, but perceptions of the startup. Likewise, we can also explore how beliefs about what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur might interact with or even exacerbate the racial bias we see in venture capital decision-making. So in conducting this research, we aim to provide preliminary evidence for the role racial bias plays in VC decision-making and to consequently open the door for future research exploring racial and gender inequities in the field. Entrepreneurship is seen as the truest archetype of the American dream, but it remains a deeply unequal and unjust field, particularly for racial minorities, as well as those from other marginalized groups. Investors must ensure that those who are capable of succeeding are given the chance to do so regardless of what they look like. So thank you. We're incredibly honored to be recipients of a CloudResearch grant. Thank you to the Innovations in Online Research Conference for having us today. And thank you all for hearing me chat about this.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. Yeah, thinking about your study, maybe you should use some of Art's faces to manipulate, right, what the entrepreneurs look like. I'm just kidding, but yeah, no, these are really great studies. I feel like they really are innovative in terms of their methodology, or attempt to do something really interesting or difficult online, and develop tools that will be useful for other researchers. And we really look forward to hearing, what you guys find. And please, keep us in the loop. We're really very interested in just knowing how your research is going. So please, keep in touch. And thank you for submitting these great proposals, and for sharing that with us.